start the recording. Amazing. On behalf of the ladies at UX Melbourne, I acknowledge that although we are scattered throughout Melbourne and beyond, that we are all in traditional land. Many of us will be on the lands of the Warrawong and Woonwurrung language groups of the greater South Central and Eastern Kulin nations. I pay respect to their elders, past, present, and importantly, the emerging leaders, as well as any other First Nations people present today. The heart of the LTX community is driven by the desire to connect and build something together, be it shared knowledge, shared inspiration, or shared networks, whether it's in person or, like right now, from afar. The First Peoples of this country have the same desire to connect. It's seen and felt through their spiritual relationship with Mother Earth, the way they pass on knowledge through storytelling, and their efforts to communicate from afar using smoke signals. We're not that different from each other. Tonight is the second last evening of the National Reconciliation Week in Australia. It acknowledges that we all have a role to play in collectively building relationships and communities that value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples, histories, and cultures. So, as we connect tonight, let us remember that there is so much we can learn from the communities around us, especially those that have been here before us. Hello, my name is Berlin, and I'm one of the ladies at UX co-organizers here. Joining me are fellow LTX co-organizers Ever and Mon. You may have heard them earlier playing music and chatting with each other. So yes, we last caught up in March in celebration of International Women's Day. And like many of you, we've been occupied settling into lockdown life and spending some time reflecting on how we can best serve the ladies at UX community in a meaningful way for the rest of 2020. Which brings me to a quick thank you to those who answered our 2020 survey. This event, in terms of its topic and its format, has been curated and designed based on your collective feedback, and we look to do the same for future events. So let's get into it. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for what is our 6th birthday celebration and our very first online meetup. Tonight, we have an excellent lineup of speakers, 3 designers from the LTX community that will give us lightning talks on different aspects of UX. We have Miriana from Simplicit talking about her most recent experience designing research in a COVID-19 environment. Melissa from Born Digital on her top tips for running engaging remote workshops. And Lucy from Transpire with how to facilitate remote design studios. Each talk will be for about 10 to 15 minutes. Once all speakers are done, we'll open up for Q&As. Speaking of Q&As, please feel free to get involved with tonight's events. Post your questions in the Zoom chat throughout the event. If your question is for a specific speaker, be sure to address it to them. Otherwise, it will be applied to all speakers. Tweet us at ladies.uxmel on Twitter, no B. Tag us on Instagram at ladies.uxmelb with a B. Aside from that, feel free to use the hashtag LTUXmelb across any social media platforms. Without further ado, I'll pass the virtual mic over to Miriana.
Thanks, Berlin. That was a lovely introduction. So yeah, thank you, ladies. Lovely meeting you all. So I'm Miriana Taflaga. I'm one of the practitioners at Simplicit. I just wanted to acknowledge the 6th anniversary of Ladies That UX. It's a wonderful event across the world and in Melbourne in particular. And I also just wanted to thank you for the opportunity today. And I'm especially pleased to present this topic because I think it's one of those things that's sort of playing on everyone's mind at this point in time. So as I start, a little bit of context. So we started the year dealing with raging bushfires across Australia, and also I'll move to the next slide as well. But more vaguely, there started to be some information about a virus that was sort of circulating around the world. And then by the 25th of January, we pretty much heard our first case of COVID-19 in Melbourne. And then around this time, we were at Simplicit pretty much working, as per usual in the office and that kind of thing. Around the 17th of March, one of our clients actually reached out to us asking for advice on how to conduct some research with their customers. Now, they were an online only provider, and they were kind of interested in two big ticket items. One about, how do these customers move around? How do they use their vehicles, other forms of transportation, and also how do they move around their own homes? How do they interact in this space, and how do they protect these assets? So this was actually a really interesting project for us. And of course, they wanted a customer journey map, some personas, a service blueprint, and answers to 68 questions, all within a 3 to 4 week period. So for me, this is really exciting because it signals, a whole raft of different research approaches, from user interviews to some user testing, and also some contextual inquiries, which I really love. I love going into, people's environments and observing and interviewing, and, great. Then, of course, March 22 hit, and that means lockdown. So it meant that conducting interviews, contextual inquiries was out of the question. We also knew that it wouldn't be safe for our staff or even for our participants to sort of put them in awkward situations where they had to move around, one they couldn't, and also that it could be a stressful environment. So we needed to think about these kinds of considerations in this space. Also, many people would have even lost their jobs or in stand down. There was a lot of insecurity in terms of income. And then the issue about, how do you get quality results in this environment started to come into play. The other thing that we started to think about was that people might be isolated from their friends and family. They might be quite stressed. They're even living with their children 24/7. They're learning how to use Zoom. They're fighting for toilet paper. They're dealing with a pandemic puppy. So this is a new environment altogether. So as part of this, we developed a research proposal to deal with this environment, and ultimately we won the work. We're actually still in the middle of this work at this point in time, but through this process, I think I've come up with 5 key lessons that I wanted to share with you. So let me start with the first one. And this was learned fairly early on, and it's this need to slow down. Now, if you know me at all, I speak fast, I think fast, I am fast, and I'm not very good at slowing down. So that's one of the first lessons that I came across. So as I mentioned before, it became clear that we needed to use a whole raft of different remote UX tools. And we also needed a substitute for our contextual inquiry. So quick decisions needed to be made around that. And like many of you that are sort of in this space, it's using the interviewing tools that we're using today, such as, Zoom or Skype or the like, in terms of interviewing and conducting user testing and research that way. For the contextual inquiries, in order for us to get those really deep, rich insights, and also within their contexts and homes, we constructed or thought about, well, how do we get that richness? So we thought, well, potentially a diary study would be the best way of doing it. It wouldn't be a diary study in the sense of, following people doing activities in their day-to-day stuff. It would be a set of activities that we could plan. And so we kind of we called it loosely a diary study. But we didn't really know the format of these things. And I guess the other thing that played a part in our team was this is a great opportunity to finally use some really cool tools, such as, qualitative research or online tools such as Indema or Experience Fellow or DScout. And, for us as practitioners to be able to play around and experiment with those kinds of tools, it's like, just exciting. Now, as I said, what was interesting about this period was the volume of questions, the questions that we had, but also from our clients. And it was more than usual. And I think we started picking up on this theme. So I found myself having to repeat the answers a number of times and in multiple formats. And the questions that started coming was about the work, the research, how we would handle participants, but the questions were very detailed and even more nuanced than normal. And I guess that's not unusual given the environment. But what was also interesting was that this level of questioning increased over time, and also we saw it within our own teams, with the providers who we were working with. And I don't know whether it reflected just that increased level of anxiety within the community, whether it was hard for people to concentrate and actually hear what was going on, which, you know, could be part of the fact that we're all sort of in a contained, stressed environment. So that need to slow down really became quite poignant. And throughout the project, sometimes just actually forcing ourselves to slow down, to check that check the messaging, just to make sure that we iterated or, you know, repeated ourselves many times was quite important. And it meant patience as well. So that's the first lesson. Like, let's just slow things down deliberately. The next thing that next lesson was really about keeping things simple. So for us, as I mentioned before, you know, I was really excited about using these potential new tools. But it also meant in this environment that we quickly needed to learn how to understand how the platforms would work. We would need to onboard our participants, and there would be a steep learning curve. So I'll get you to flick to the next slide just to say these are the kinds of tools that we were looking at. The other element here was the cost of these platforms as well that we needed to factor in. Sometimes we couldn't actually get a quote without actually having a one-on-one discussion with them. One of the providers basically came back to us saying that it would be $10,000 to actually use their platform. And it's like, well, that's kind of not, you know, in the question. The other thing that we needed to think about, because we were creating a diary study, was how would we get the participants to actually share their documents with us? In our workplace, we're really familiar with Slack, and we were thinking like that would be a great channel. But then we started thinking about the fact that, well, Slack isn't exactly the most intuitive program. Did we have time to onboard participants? Did we have time to actually deal with all their technical issues and the like? And then there's the other issue of, you know, you can't actually see if a participant actually reaches out to another participant, and what happens if that engagement becomes a little bit inappropriate, or how do we protect the privacy of our participants? Then there's the question of Google Drive. Not everyone has Gmail accounts. So there was a lot of little things coming into play about, you know, what do we do in this environment, given that we're really relying on an online environment here. So once again, it was that whole thing about slowing it down. And I guess the other theme is keeping it all simple. And the lesson here is that, you know, just because the technology exists and we do want to learn these new approaches and to experiment, I guess the quality of the research is really what mattered here. And also, in order to make the participants comfortable in this already stressed environment, was let's keep it really basic. So in the end, we decided to go as simple as possible, keep all the activities in Word, get the participants to actually email us because they all knew how to, you know, upload attachments. And in order to recreate the words, we encouraged participants to take screenshots so that they didn't actually have to go out and show us their world. They could actually just create their world using, you know, the internet. So, you know, thank goodness for those kinds of things. So simplicity does win out in this space. The next lesson for us was about care. And not just for ourselves as practitioners, but also for our participants. So in terms of our participants, we knew our recruiter had a policy about how to deal with COVID-19 in their environment and also to protect our participants. So we knew that as a fundamental first step that was being taken care of. But in terms of our interview guides, in terms of our preparation, the way that we thanked our participants, we built all these elements in. So in our interview guides, we actually acknowledged their environment. We made an effort to thank people for their participations, particularly within this environment, knowing that some circumstances were difficult. We actually asked our participants how they were managing since March and building that in. Within the own prompts, I guess one of the issues that, you know, we're trying to capture these experiences. So we needed to make sure that we captured experiences pre and post COVID-19 so that people could actually distinguish between the two so they didn't become enmeshed in their current world. So there were all these elements here. Then for our team, we were working frantically, collaboratively. I mean, it's really a remote remote worker's dream in the sense of how we were working. We're drafting, updating, sharing, reflecting, writing, managing, talking all together. We onboarded 2 extra team members. We carried out 24 interviews over a 4-day period. And then we had the daily activities running. We were cleaning up notes, getting them ready to upload on the Miro, writing project summaries. We chased up participants, dealt with technical issues, dealt with Zooms, It's exhausting. And this is the thing, like, once again, we keep this lesson of like slowing things down and actually self-care, we kept forgetting about. So not only that, we were sitting for a lot longer and in front of a screen. And so what we kind of forgot to do, which is important, was that we forgot to build in time and space for us as practitioners. And we didn't really account for that need for self-care. And the other element is that no longer could you get up from your desk, walk to the kitchen, make yourself a cup of coffee, speak to to your colleagues at the photocopier, whatever it is. You couldn't, that whole thing about let's go for a quick coffee or let's go for a step out for lunch. There wasn't any of that element there. So we didn't actually have built-in protection to actually give ourselves that space. So the lesson here as well about designing for the work environment so that you actually are building in those breaks. You actually are building in the walking, that space to do that. And also building in that space to disconnect from our screens and to disconnect from each other. So that was lesson number 3 for us. The next one was number 4, which is about adapting and learning new ways and reframing our ways of working in our new environment. Now, as designers, who would have thought that we would spend a lot of time using Excel? And this was horrific, like really horrific for some of our team members. I think one of them actually said, when I see that, I think of scorpions. So that was kind of interesting. But for us to use Miro, a really great collaborative tool where we could actually digitally synth in order to get those uploads in a bulk way, Excel was the way to do it. I have noticed though, I think since Sunday, you can actually use Word now. You can go from tables straight to there. So I don't know whether they're actually changing the way that they do things, but they're opening it up a little bit. But for us, it was actually using tools that we didn't actually like using, or and learning how to use them in the most optimal kind of way. So so we were using Excel to do this stuff in order to upload over 2,300 post-it notes in order to, synth all this stuff. And along the way, we actually learned some hacks. I don't know whether anyone's really familiar with Miro or with it, uploading. But I don't know whether you know that you could actually upload every single participant's detail and in columns have topics going across. And you can actually do one single upload. So you're not doing what we did, which was upload one participant at a time and then cluster them individually, just like you would in a physical space. We didn't know that. We could have saved ourselves probably 2-3 days worth of effort. So these are the things about learning and building in time to actually speak to others about who have had this kind of experience and learn from them. So adapting and not actually thinking that your physical way of working would be the same as it would be in a virtual or in an online world. The other thing is this formula. Okay, so I know some of my colleagues would look at that and their skin would crawl looking at that. But this formula means you can actually combine 2 content cells and you can save yourself an enormous amount of time. So you're not actually having to copy paste or combine things. Like, they're the things that I wish I didn't know, but I do know that now and it saves me time. And it's that whole point about adapting to our work environment, using learning skills that actually just helps you save your time, and also not assuming that the way that you previously worked, even if it was yesterday, is the best way to work in your new environment. The final point is about coping. And I guess as many of us, that blur between our home lives, our work lives has really, everything's kind of blurred. And for me, it's collisions as well. So I've got 3 children. So in the past, 2-3 weeks while I was running these interviews, I've had kids come in not caring that I'm running an interview anymore. They're talking at me as I'm taking notes frantically, or they're opening and shutting the door and crawling between my feet. So, you know, the final slide is like my little, this is my middle daughter. Yeah, she was constantly coming into my world, clashing and crashing. And I guess what? We all coped, the participants coped. Yeah, so that's pretty much it in terms of the summary. Working remotely. For us, it's all about, slowing down, and things will take a little bit longer, and actually being really deliberate about, you know, designing for that. Keeping things simple where you can. Being really deliberate about self-care for your participants and then also for yourselves and your team. And it's all about building in time to learn new skills so that we are adapting, and probably being a little bit forgiving in terms of yourselves as well. And then whatever happens, you're going to cope. And that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Miriana. I will save my questions for Q&A, and we'll get straight into Melissa's lightning talk. Melissa, feel free to hop off mute.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, and thanks to the amazing ladies at UX team, and also to everyone dialing in today. I'm Melissa Voderberg, the design strategy lead for Born Digital, a digital consultancy. So I've run over 50 workshops and tried a number of techniques. Some of them have been amazing, and some have completely bombed. The types of workshops that I've run have been from people of all different backgrounds. Surgeons to electrical workers to rice farmers, and even people who study dirt for a living. And despite this range of professions, I've found that there's things that work and things that fail. Could just go to the next slide, that would be great. For all my workshops, I use a design thinking process, probably similar to a lot of you out there. And for me, the most important components are empathy for the users, a multidisciplinary expertise being brought into the session, and divergent and convergent thinking. In order to still achieve these components with remote workshops, I'm going to share my tips, and I've categorized these into 3 sections. Number 1, preparation. Number 2, running the session. And number 3, follow-up. So the first area that I'm going to talk about is preparation. Before COVID, I'd run face-to-face workshops where I'd have some people attending in person and other people dialing in. And I don't know if you've ever been a part of this or have dialed into a workshop, but you always get the short end of the stick. You miss some of the engagement that's happening when people are discussing. Sometimes the camera isn't following where all the action is. And the great thing about running remote workshops is that you can plan the session based on the same access and view. So the first thing that I like to do when I'm running a workshop is to plan out all of my activities and send out a pre-work pack and agenda. I find this is especially beneficial for remote sessions because it jumpstarts the lateral thinking process, and it gives people time to ask questions from their team. It gets them thinking about the design challenge. I like to align the pre-work exercises with the agenda, and so it's easy to follow along. The most common workshop that I run is at the start of a project, and normally it looks like this. I have 3 aims. Pretty much always it's about understanding the end user. Almost always it's defining the problem statement. And another one that is often really common is identifying the user journey, outlining pain points and opportunities. So I use these aims to structure the agenda with corresponding activities, and then I put together a pre-work pack, which has questions and prompts related to these aims. So you can see here, and this is purposely quite small, all of my slides, some of the details are pretty small, almost out of focus, and I have to say that's actually on purpose, just because of some of the intellectual property and some of the clients that I'm working with. So what you can see here is in this pre-work pack, I've got understanding your end user, a sample of an empathy mapping template, and some of the questions here are who would be using the solution, what are their goals, what information do they need to make good decisions, what influences them in their decision-making process. And none of these questions are probably new to you. But because you won't have group discussions like face-to-face workshops, providing this pre-work pack gives attendees a chance to discuss internally prior to the session, get on the phone, call someone in their team that they might want to find out more information. This will help them be more prepared and also help the workshop move quicker. I also like to provide a journey map template. Even though most people won't complete all of it, it will get them to start thinking about the process steps, pain points, opportunities. Rule of thirds. So to minimize distraction and disengagement, I'd recommend that you reduce your online workshop by 2/3. I find that really short, time-bound sessions structure the flow and help people stay on topic. By sending out the pre-work, you'll be able to move through the content quicker and preserve the energy of your attendees. Just go on to the next one, thank you. So the second thing I'm going to discuss is running the session. So tech setup. No matter what, you can always count on at least one person having an issue with their microphone, with their camera. I'm sure we've all heard that phrase, can you see my screen? Can everyone hear me? Because we have a short amount of time to run these workshops, we want to try to make sure that everything's lined up ahead of time. I put an extra 15 minutes in the beginning of the agenda just to avoid running 10 minutes behind for the rest of the session. Also like to pre-test equipment with another member of my team and identify the best browser for the conferencing software. It's quite surprising, but some people are still using Internet Explorers. There's a few large organizations that still use that, and it's really good to try to test that out before you're trying to get 15 people on a call for your workshop and someone's not able to get in. A lot of times it's just based on the software not being up to date. Collaborative software. Miranda touched on this a little bit before, but I also really like Miro and Mural. Great selection of templates, journey maps, product roadmaps, user empathy maps. I find that Miro is the one that I use for the most part, but I'm not a big fan of the audio. I prefer to use a conferencing software for audio and then give everyone a day pass to come into Miro so that we can just work on the board together. Covert training. So the best sessions are when the attendees are familiar with the software and they feel able to express themselves. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of time to train people ahead of time in Miro. Sometimes I'll have attendees who are very busy and it's really hard to even just get the session booked. They don't want to make time ahead of time, another 30 minutes just to learn the software. So what I try to do is run a covert training session. What I do is have a covert training session that doubles as an icebreaker. You can see there on the right-hand side, it says, what did you have for breakfast today? So I'll ask all the attendees to answer the question by dragging a post-it to the board and get them to change the color on it. I know this sounds like super basic, but I found that dedicating just 2 to 3 minutes to answer a no pressure question makes a big difference in engagement and contribution later on. Top to bottom. So I love working in Miro. I love how it's such a great, fantastic, large workspace. You can go really high, you can go left to right. There's all this space to play. But what I found when you're running a workshop for people who are seeing it for the first time, it can be a really bad experience. The first couple of workshops that I ran, I had boards all over the place and people couldn't find where we were when we were moving through the information. You spend a lot of time saying, come on up, 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 over, over, over. Oh, I can see you, we're over here. And trying to get all of the attendees to get into the one place off the board that we're working on. What I do now is I start from the top and move down the workspace. So each of the aims, I'll number that with the artboard, write the title of the aim on the artboard, and then work from top to bottom. I sometimes draw a big arrow on the actual workspace so people know that we're going to start from the top and go down the bottom. And by the end of the workshop, we'll be at the bottom of the working space. You can see here on the board, I've got a frustrometer. So while we're working on that, it is really good to identify pain points and then pull all of the post-its over onto the frustrometer to be able to measure how frustrating the task is. By organizing the workshop in this way, having each aim on its own artboard, it makes it really easier for first-time users, but it's also really great for when you're putting together your workshop summary, because all of the information, the post-its, the notes, the annotations, the drawings, anything that people have done, is all in the one area. Name calling, the last one. It's important to know who's in your workshop. Know who they are, know their expertise. I like to make a cheat sheet. Some of my cheat sheets say things like, Jenny, she knows everything about distribution. She's been with the company for 15 years. Once I have my cheat sheet, it means I can direct questions in the workshop to the appropriate person. Instead of saying things like, can anyone tell me about, and then you get radio silence. What I like to say is, Jenny, you must have seen lots of change over your time at the business. What do you think stops people from blah, blah, blah? I'm sure we've all been on a conference call where we're multitasking with emails and kind of tune out to some of the meeting. No matter how engaging your workshop is, you're still going to have one or two people who are trying to just, finish a few things off and are sort of not paying 100% attention. If you use this classroom technique by calling out people by name, you will not only get people staying on their toes, but it shows that you've done your research, and it will make everyone more alert because they might be next. The third area that I'm going to talk about is follow-up. So one of the benefits of running online workshops is that people who are naturally more introverted, participating and engaging in online workshops is a lot less intimidating than face-to-face. It's a great leveler. And what I found is that at the end of the workshops, I allow people to still come in and access the boards that we've made in Miro. It's been really great to see how people add their insights. They're often really reflective about the session, and that they can contribute in a way that means that it's documented. It's not like just a piece of butcher paper that gets pulled down at the end of the workshop and you never see again. Next steps. To communicate the decisions and actions determined by the workshop, it's a good idea to follow with a workshop summary. This is a place to summarize the workshop aims, document all the decisions that have been made, and to delegate the tasks. In a face-to-face workshop, you're always taking photos and capturing all the different things that happen during the activities. But what I like to do for an online remote workshop is set up a screen recording before kicking off the session. This makes it easy to capture the events that you'd normally photograph, and then providing this resource for attendees assists with the actionable next steps. Just go to the last one, thank you. So just to summarize, by spending time to prepare pre-work, organizing your workspace, and following up with a summary, you should be all set for running remote workshops. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was awesome, very practical tips that I have jotted down myself from my own workshops. Last but not least, I shall introduce Lucy Serret from Transpire. Lucy, hop off your mute.
Hi, everybody. So my name's Lucy. Just first of all, thanks everybody for dialing in, and thank you so much, ladies at UX, for inviting me to speak. So today I'm going to be, well, this evening, we're going to be going through some remote design studios. So first of all, I'm going to pretty much introduce what do I mean by a remote design studio. Then I'm going to be touching on how have I been running a remote design studio at the moment during COVID times, and then going through some high-level tips for facilitators. So whether you're running design studios now or will be in the future, it's just some high-level learnings that I've learned along the way. Cool. So what do I mean when I say a design studio? So basically, design studio is a brainstorming session. It's an ideation method where you involve a variety of people in the business to rapidly sketch out solutions to a specific problem. So it is a form of workshop, but the way that I'm going to be talking about it tonight is really more of an internal workshop with internal stakeholders. So how do we typically, or well, how have I typically ran a design studio? Well, back pre-COVID, first of all, I would engage the stakeholders. So this can be pretty much anyone from like a developer, the client, product owners, business analysts, basically anybody who has a vested interest in the product or service that you're designing. Now, the reason why we engage such a wide variety of people in the same room is to basically get everybody's preconceived ideas of what a product or service is going to look like or not look like, and get all those ideas up on the table and have a bit of a discussion about it. It's a great way of decentralizing where ideas come from as well, and not sort of just keeping that within the design team. Next up, but probably at the same time, you really need to define the problem that you're wanting people to solve in the design studio. So whether that is you want people to be thinking about a particular page in a product, or perhaps a sort of larger design challenge that you're currently facing in the product or service. This can be communicated in a number of ways. You can either, I guess, communicate that through a how might we statement, or a problem statement, or a persona scenario. Basically any way that sort of fits your objectives and is understandable to everybody in the room. Next up, when you're actually in the design studio, so you're all in the room, you have all the people who are engaged in the design studio, you need to really set up the scene. So thinking about, I guess, going through the method and making sure that people feel comfortable about what a design studio is. So because you're involving quite a variety of people within the business, typically you would have people in the room that maybe have never done it before. So making sure everybody understands at the beginning what it is, what their expectations are. There's a number of different methods that you can use, but all of them pretty much involve pieces of paper, pens, and a timer. So it's all about time-boxed, rapid sketching. So once you sort of briefed everybody on the scope and the expectations, you then go into the rapid sketching bit, which is basically where you set the timer for 5 minutes or 8 minutes, and you get people to sketch as many different ideas to solve that specific problem. After the time's up and everybody's sort of got their ideas out, we typically get all those sort of artifacts and we stick them up on a physical wall, and we sort of sit back and we have a look at them and where everybody's coming from. This is where I traditionally, we all go around the room and maybe give 1 minute per person to explain what their ideas are about. And then we get into voting. So I guess at this point, everything's been quite divergent. So really thinking wide, thinking really outside the box, like all the different ways that we could solve this particular problem. And then the voting is really that converging activity where we start really sort of synthesizing through and understanding where people's preferences are or what people's sort of more gravitated towards. Big tip here is to get people to vote in their head first before they actually go towards the wall. We're really social creatures, and so I think people do tend to vote for things that other people have voted for. So having a bit of a moment, getting people to understand everything that's on the wall, getting them to vote in their head, and then approaching the wall and voting is one that I found works quite successfully. In terms of how you actually vote, we've typically used red little sticky dots or sticky notes or whiteboard markers. Pretty much anything that you can just convey is a vote, and typically we would give them 3 votes, but if you have a much larger group, you can sort of give them more votes. It's basically what you need to achieve out of the session. So when Corona hit and we had to start working remotely, there was still definitely this need to continue doing design studios. So I've been working with this great project team at the moment, and we've found that design studios have been a really great way of getting a bit of team bonding happening as well. So they're a really fun activity. It's very creative. You get to sort of just draw scrappy things around, and it can be a lot of fun. So at the beginning of March, we had to start thinking about, okay, how am I going to translate this design studio, which is traditionally such a magical sort of event all in the same room? How are we going to mimic that online? So when I was actually thinking about the process and what would maybe change, realized that nothing actually changes in the process. It's more just the tools that you use to get you there. So particularly when we're thinking about engaging stakeholders or anybody who's going to be involved, rather than being in a physical room using Zoom or Google Meet or a video conferencing tool, to basically be in that same sort of virtual room. So if we go to the next slide, thanks, Brilliant. So when thinking about what actually changes, like you still need to define the problem. You need to still be quite specific about what you want to achieve and what you want people to solve in the session. You still need to do that setup and brief people on the parameters and the boundaries, making sure people feel comfortable with the time limit, etc. But I've found that the sessions actually, they run pretty much the same time as if you did it in a physical environment, perhaps even quicker. So the way that we've been running them at the moment, they're only really a 30-minute meeting, which is one of the benefits of them, is that they're a super quick and dirty sort of activity, and you can get a lot of value out of it because you end up with this sort of pile of ideas and just a lot of inspiration that you can work with and sort of continue with and keep iterating on. The rapid sketching. So I would definitely advise keep going with pen and paper. So initially I was thinking, oh, well, if we're using remote tools, should we be using a remote sketching tool so people can see live sketches or drawings? But it's a tried and tested method. There's a reason why we use pen and paper. It's because it's, you can scrunch it up, you can throw it away. It's not precious. Whereas when you start drawing with pixels, psychologically, you just start wanting to sort of make things look a bit more beautiful or lined up. And the main objectives of design studios, it's idea generation. It's all about get as many ideas out as possible. It's not about making them look good. The part where we start actually sharing the ideas, that's when we've been starting to use tools like Miro or Envision Freehand and really trying to replace that whiteboard or that physical wall experience to a virtual wall experience. And also with the voting as well. So if we go to the next slide, thank you. So this is a quick example of, what a design studio might look like in a physical room where you sort of stick them all up on the wall. Whereas now with the way we've been using it at the moment is after everybody's sort of sketched their ideas and sort of little wireframes, everybody takes a photo, we upload it into a shared Slack channel. We sort of go around the Slack channel room, and in Zoom or Google Meets, we go around the room and people sort of quickly explain their ideas. We then sort of import them into Envision Freehand or Miro, and that's where we can come back, and it's this sort of artifact that we can always reference, and people could go in and add notes or and also vote. So yeah, it's worked out really well actually. And something that's interesting too is that I found I've gone back to these artifacts probably more than if they were just a photo in Google Drive or if they were sort of documented elsewhere. So they've been a fantastic tool, particularly in the remote whiteboard tools, to be able to keep coming back and keep sort of looking at, how are other people sort of thinking about solving that particular problem, and going back and seeing this sort of plethora of ideas. So tips for facilitators. So I guess just from this experience of running physical design studios and then having to translate them to a virtual environment. So we've run about 6 since Corona hit, and I've sort of, basically come up with sort of some core tips on things that I would definitely recommend. The first one being to always set the scene. So never underestimate the setup that you need to do to introduce this method, particularly because you've got a range of people in the room who may have never done it before. I've fallen short of this in the past where perhaps I didn't explain exactly what the problem we were solving as clearly as I could, or maybe I rushed through it and then there's questions that sort of come later. So it's really important to sort of check in with everybody, make sure that everybody understands what the objective of the session is. It can be quite an odd sort of activity too. It's not often that we get to sort of just draw pictures in our workplace, but it's one of those great opportunities to get really crafty with it as well. So the second tip I would give is it's not a drawing competition. So it's not about designing this beautiful wireframe it's purely about getting ideas out as quick as possible. And everybody can draw a circle, a square, and a triangle. It's not rocket science. But in saying that as well, drawing can be quite an anxiety-riddled activity for some people. And so I think definitely keep that in mind. If someone doesn't feel comfortable about drawing, they feel more comfortable about expressing their ideas through words, by all means, there's no hard and fast rule. And I think it's better to get people to do something that they actually feel comfortable with, because the outcome will be the same. You'll still have this pile of ideas. And if the drawing activity is stifling for them and it's going to prevent them from getting those ideas out, then it's not worth it. Third tip is to keep it sketchy. So as I was mentioning before, just because we're using remote tools, and I think Miriana mentioned this before as well, it doesn't mean that we have to translate everything to be digital. It's quite nice to be able to draw on paper and sort of have that moment away from the screen and sort of just, get really scrappy with it. So my recommendation here is really just don't change something because it's not really broken, and there's a reason why we do it on pen and paper. It's because it's not precious. Next tip is cameras on, and I found that this is probably a tip for all meetings, or maybe not all of them, but particularly with the design studio, and just checking in and making sure that people are engaged in the session. Just making sure that you can sort of see people and look them in the eye in a virtual way, and just make sure that people are engaged and they are not sort of doing some side work, and because it's also a very rapid sort of discussion and meeting. So having cameras on makes it a lot more lively and a much better experience for everybody. Last but not least is to iterate. So based on, thinking back to the design studios that I was running right at the beginning to what we're doing today, we've slowly evolved the process a little bit. And I think the key here is to give space for feedback. At the end of each session, I try to sort of provoke the team to give me some feedback about, how they found that the session went. If they could change something, what would it be? If they could keep something, what would it be? So giving space for people to come back and comment and I guess give ideas on how to change it. We're all learning about how to work in this environment, and so I think it's really important to keep an open mindset and be open to different ideas and keep testing. So without further ado, that concludes the talk. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lucy. That was great. And thank you again to Miriana and Melissa for their talks earlier. I will now get Mon, who's one of our fellow co-organizers of LTUX, to hop off mute, as she'll conduct the Q&As with our panel.
Okay, question time. So I got some good questions come through on the chat. Don't forget to keep sending them through so we can ask them. So I've got a couple for Miriana from Aggie. I've got, hi Miriana, fantastic presentation. I was wondering if you could extend on what the 68 questions are that you have mentioned in the beginning of the session. Maybe not all 68, but yeah.
There are actually 68 different questions that the client had about their customers. So they centered on wanting to know about, how did they view their vehicles, how do they view transport. So there's a whole series of questions on that. There's a whole series of questions about their home, about their social media usage, about their digital affinity. So it was all, those questions really centered on the customer, that they didn't know much about their customers, so they had a lot of questions. So that's what that was about.
And one from Vasiliki. How, if any, will that remote experience change the way that you work at Simplicit?
Really good question, because working in a consultancy, things do tend to go hard and fast in that space. But I think it was a really eye-opening experience about just pacing ourselves so that we could actually, do the work in a really reflective way, but also taking care of ourselves. So I think ongoing, it's one of those things that that we need to be really mindful of and design in. So I kind of want to continue that practice going forward, whether it's remote or whether it's in a physical sort of space. So yes.
So you also mentioned screenshots. So when you were taking the notes, you got people to write in the Word document, and then you said that they took screenshots. Would you be able to elaborate on what you meant by that?
Oh, okay. I probably confuse people in that space. So for the daily activities, so they weren't actually done during the interview sessions. These were the daily activities that people could do in their own time. We were asking people to actually, talk about, where do they, their travel elements, what things that they like to do, what their hobbies were. So we were trying to get participants to really build their pictures. And normally what we would do is actually get people to go out in the field and actually take those photos or, give those descriptions. But because we didn't want to put people in the position of actually doing activities that they couldn't or would put them at risk in this environment, we really encourage people to recreate their worlds using, the website. So, if they had a favorite activity that they want to do, instead of showing us what it would be, they could just take screenshots of, someone else doing it. It didn't have to be them, but it was more about what they wanted to do. So whether it was within, the home, their location, using transport. So that's what I meant by that.
Great. I've got another couple here for you. How do you consciously check in with yourself and ensure that you slow down when it comes to work? What are some of your methods or tips? Especially you've got 3 kids and you were doing research.
Yep.
It's very impressive.
Yeah, so for me, it's actually, I'm addicted to tea. So that is one of the methods. But whenever I'm actually speaking to one of my colleagues and we're not actually working side by side together with Zoom, it's actually standing up and actually moving around. At the end of the day, I now force myself to actually go for a walk. So even if I haven't finished my work, I'll actually, get up and go for a walk. So I do that, whereas previously I wouldn't have done that. As I said to you, my world collides. Sometimes those breaks are actually enforced upon me. So my daughter ran away to Antarctica yesterday and also to London. So that forced me to have a walk, to have a break, because I had to deal with a mini crisis. But it was averted. She ate popcorn on the front doorstep and it was fine. So yes, wearing my coat because it was cold. So yes, it's being very deliberate about that. And also with the team is actually talking about it more, like, how are you having a break? Let's have a meeting to have a break. So one of my team members, I think I saw earlier, she tries to have pretty much on the hour, a 5-minute break or more after that, in order just to reset and refresh and get off the screens.
Yeah, that was actually one of our other questions was how did you help your team cope with the increased screen time?
Well, they were kind of telling me that we needed breaks as well. So I think collectively, I think we really realised that, and this is part of my doing as well. Like, we were building in these interviews, trying to get things done really rapidly, and it was in the middle of it. Then you realise, like, we didn't have to design it this way. Not only that, things were so hard, so high paced that, we needed to actually build in that time as well, because the breaks or the, those chats that we were having afterwards to talk about the participants or writing up summaries, they were all on the screen. So you didn't actually get the break. And there's something about just looking at this up at the screen. It's actually, it's really tiring. And so, having to, get up and go is important. I mean, at the moment we're still looking at the screens because we're synthing using Miro, doing that. So it's actually, enforcing those breaks as much as possible.
And when we go to a post-COVID world, what tips are you going to bring? Because you mentioned a lot of slow, deliberate work. What tips are you going to bring into the office back in Simplicit?
I think it's kind of the same sort of thing, but I think in the office it's easier in the sense that you got a coffee shop downstairs, or you got your favorite place that you have lunch. So I can imagine that a lot of those kinds of things are going to be really delightful when we first come back, because they're going to be a bit of a novelty for us. But it's actually planning it, and it's designing it, and actually allowing that to happen. So yeah.
Okay, so I have a question here for Melissa. Hi, Melissa. This is from Aggie. Great presentation. Would you be able to extend on the frustration measurement method that you are using?
The frustrometer? Sure. So I've tried a few different things over the years of how to try to prioritize pain points, because pain points can be quite subjective. And I think sometimes we can get very quantized about that. I've tried matrix where you have either high effort, low effort, high reward, low reward. And sometimes it takes a while for people to get their head around that kind of quadrant way of thinking. And I've tried to simplify it. I started doing this when we were doing face-to-face, and I've just duplicated that online, where we get everybody to put top 3 pain points just as a post-its, and then drag them across to a drawing of a thermometer where you put your pain point on that thermometer of whether it's really, really high or if it's medium or not so much, so that we can focus as a group on the stuff that's really burning and try to get everyone to think about those areas that are just really upsetting the team. Again, I think that you can start with that and then maybe be more precise around how to prioritize that from a feasibility or viability or desirability perspective. But I think just to get people thinking about it and it be really fast in an easy explanation form, I find the frustrometer is quite a nice way to do it, and people normally can get their head around it pretty quickly.
I've got another one here. You know how some workshops include a break. Do you consider incorporating breaks into your remote workshops to give everyone a bit of a breather, or do you focus on sticking to just one workshop with a bit of a shorter time period?
So I normally do about 90 minutes, and I will do a break in the middle. And again, I try to do all of the activities I use the Miro counter so that people can see how much time is left. And then when we do have a break, I put like a picture on the slide. So if people are going away to say, what time we'll be back. And I normally try to have something sort of, I don't know, that makes people smile, like a monkey. Everyone loves monkeys. I don't know. I use monkeys a lot in my presentations. A monkey, like, stretching their arms out, like having a yawn or having a cup of coffee or something. So if someone does step out and they come back and they can see that they haven't missed anything, that we're just on a break until we start again.
And another question here, your talk was great, full of really practical tips. Was there ever a time, you mentioned a lot of like great organizational tips, was there ever a time that you weren't so organized or you got caught out there?
That's a good one. I think similar to what Lucy said, I think that I've had the same challenge of assuming that what you're doing is going to be understood, and so not dedicating enough time at the beginning to set the scene. I think that a lot of your role as a facilitator is about creating alignment, even though you might have only been dealing with 1 or 2 people to set up the workshop and to define what the problem statement is. Sometimes when you get into the workshop, people have been invited along who had no idea. They just suddenly have a workshop in their calendar and they rock up without any communication, any understanding of that there's even a problem. So I think that the times that I've had a workshop where I felt a bit out of my depth was that I realized that no one had done that communication. So trying to, again, frame the problem, talk about the users. I normally go back to saying, okay, these are the people that we're designing for. These are some of the challenges that they're facing. And then taking people through that so that it makes more sense for someone who might not have been kept in the loop.
Excellent. And this is one for the panel. What does everyone think is their favourite online collaboration tool?
You go ahead, Lucy. We've had a few.
Well, that's a really good question. I would find, I've been using Envision Freehand a lot, and I think that's just because it's been like a lot of the design studios that we've been doing has been quite linked to, using the Envision product further with prototyping and actually seeing those designs come out. And it's been really good for what it's been used for. And that's something that I'll say is that, there's some great tools out there, but just being really specific about what's the purpose behind why you're actually using that tool, and knowing when that purpose is maybe stretching it. So other than Envision Freehand, I would also say Trello. So we use Trello a lot at Transpire. We use it for note-taking during usability testing sessions. We use it for lots of different things. And I don't know, the more I learn about it, the more I use it, the more I sort of love it, and I learn new things about it or new features. So yeah, big Trello fan.
And another one for Lucy. You mentioned that you kind of like skipped a few steps in the real world version of a SketchUp versus the online. In a post-COVID world, do you think that you will skip those sessions, like those steps in real life now?
Yeah, so I guess what I was communicating there was not necessarily to skip it, but that then they don't actually change. So that it's almost like it's hard baked in the process. So you will always need to know what the problem you are solving, and you will always need to be able to set the scene and have those parameters and that scope and that brief, and then including sketching. So that also sort of remains the same. It's mostly the engagement part of like where you're actually going to be hosting the session. So whether it's in a physical room or virtual, as well as sharing the ideas and voting. So basically any of those points where people are actually coming back together. Because that's the other thing that when you're doing a design studio, you're getting everybody to do some solo brainstorming. So they're all like silently doing it, and then you share it to the wider team to ensure that people aren't sort of influencing each other at that stage. So definitely wouldn't recommend skipping any stages. I feel like there's a reason why we have those stages, and they all sort of flow into each other. A little bit like what I was saying before about how, you start divergent and then you go convergent and then you can go divergent again, and you can sort of just rinse and repeat it as many times as you want. Typically the ones that I've been running at the moment, they have been just very quick, sort of one round, 30 minutes. Let's check in. We'll just do a design studio to try and solve this issue. And then, pack up. I'll sort of take those learnings or those ideas, do something with them, and then come back and present to the team. So I think there's definitely, the process in terms of the steps that you take physically and then the steps that you take virtually are actually, they're on par.
And if someone wanted to now go and run a SketchUp session and it was their first one, what resources would you recommend for them to learn the process?
Absolutely. Definitely Medium articles. So there's lots of articles all about sort of the design studio process. There's quite a number of different methods you can use. So for example, Crazy Eights is one where you have 8 minutes and then you sort of divide the page. So you have 8 squares, and it's basically you get people to do one idea a minute. There's lots of different methods, and again, it's about trying to figure out the right one for what you're trying to achieve. So just keep coming back to those objectives of why you're doing the session. What's the trigger point? Why do you need to do design studios? And also making sure it's the right method for what you're trying to achieve. So what I was saying before about it's not about thinking about UI components or like a beautiful wireframe or, information architecture. It's much earlier in that process. It's really about getting some high level ideas or high level thinking from the team and getting an idea of what other people are thinking for that particular page. So then you can incorporate that. Yeah.
When you're working with stakeholders, I noticed the first step was, have the stakeholders in the room or in the meeting. how do you work out who the best stakeholders are in order to invite into a SketchUp?
Yeah, great question. It's one of those things that it's the more the merrier in a way, but then again, there's like a bit of a cap on that as well, in which you may need like an additional facilitator to help with the session. Typically anybody, so particularly the people who are sponsoring the project. So I guess working at a consultancy, we're constantly working within organizations and working with those stakeholders. So anyone who's a key member of the project team, so definitely getting developers involved. It's really, really important. They have sometimes the best ideas. And so getting them involved in that design process is really key. Getting other designers involved, product owners, project managers, business analysts, as I mentioned before, but particularly those who are really sponsoring the project, or those who may have be those subject matter experts that you want to sort of get in the room and get their ideas out. And it's really fun. People tend to have a lot of fun with them. It's a very sort of engaging session, and it's very different for a lot of people to be doing those sorts of activities. So again, always ensuring you have that set up at the beginning is key.
So I've got a good one here from Kat to everyone, to the panel. So most of our users are not in front of technology and tend not to reply to emails or participate with online research, especially those overseas. Lucky enough, we do have reps that still get out and speak to our users on a regular basis, but having the feedback from the field helps us to continue with creating solutions. So in this sort of, there was a few questions around people that are not adapt to technology. How is your team being, or how are your teams being inclusive for those groups who might not have access to technology, or just might be not adept to using technology?
That's an interesting one, because I imagine that would apply, it's the same problem that would particularly apply before COVID-19 or this remote environment. So I guess the strategies that you had before, you'd be using in the same sort of way. I get the problem though is that previously you might have relied on reps. So that's a really challenging topic, because you don't want to be putting people at risk of exposing themselves, like whether it's the representatives or the staff or even the participants. I don't know whether you actually then need to physically mail them information, so they actually can do like old school remote testing, where you set them a whole series of tasks and get them to actually document their responses and then send them back, or whether you get people to do the activity and then phone them in a really sort of old-fashioned kind of sense of communicating. The other thing that you could probably do is it that they don't have access to technology, or they don't know how to use it? So there could be an element of actually training people up to use it. So it's building in the time to sort of get people familiar with the technology, similar to what Melissa mentioned before, is actually setting up different types of tasks that are low risk and fun-like, so you get people to be familiar with the technology. So there might be those kinds of methods to do that. The other thing you could do is also, if someone in their family or household is more familiar with technology, is actually getting them to actually help or participate or act as the mediator. So they're the kinds of options that you could look at, which would apply irrespective of us being in this environment. I know that we do that with a particular project where we're looking at people with different accessibility issues. They're actually recruiting their carer or a family member as part of that process, so that we had that extra pair of hands to either help or interpret or facilitate. So that's my views.
Yeah, I agree with Miriana. I mean, I think it depends on what the challenge is
Yeah.
that you're encountering. But, you know, old school diary studies where everything is sort of self-contained, the questions are there, you know, even including pencils or pens in the pack with a self-addressed stamped envelope. And then lots of phone calls. I mean, I'm doing a lot of phone calls at the moment with people, which is around kind of scoping out challenges as opposed to workshops where they're very design focused and visual focused. So I think it depends on what the problem statement is. And I think that for some challenges and projects, it just actually means that it needs to be on hold, because some things you can't go and be face to face with people. We can't conduct this type of research right now in a kind of fair and non-discriminatory way.
I'll just add to that too. I feel like it's really key to acknowledge that there's a skew in the research as well. So just acknowledging that, you know, we have only been able to speak to people who do have access to technology, and making that really clear that, you know, hopefully we'll be able to fill that gap, you know, later in the project when things sort of return to normal. Something I found as well is particularly with presentation slides and having meetings, is that not everybody has the same internet connection. And so avoiding GIFs and animations and videos can be just a really quick way of ensuring that you're still going to get that messaging across without relying on people having a really, you know, strong internet connection, and even sort of sending that slide deck perhaps post the meeting as well.
Actually, Lucy, that's a good point, because one of our other questions is, how have you dealt with lost internet connection during these sorts of...
Yes, absolutely. And it sort of goes to my earlier point about, yeah, cameras on, like, please, let's see your beautiful faces in a meeting. But I know that has been something that does cause issues, particularly for those who have, you know, bad internet at the time. So sort of, yeah, there's always going to be that level of, you know, slight sort of disengagement. I don't even know. I feel like maybe it was just on my system, but my face froze before when I was talking about this very thing. So maybe that's me as well. I'm also got really crappy internet connection, so that's my case. Yeah.
And has anyone found any part of remote work to actually be better than in the physical world?
I can speak to that. Yeah, in some parts, I commute. So saving that commute time is actually a real benefit. So I actually am really enjoying that. But even with the synthesis and using Miro, and, you know, despite using Excel and that kind of stuff, but we were creating, like, we're in the process of creating personas at the moment. So being able to quickly, you know, like quickly create like high-level personas, and then actually code everything within, you know, the space of, like, you know, 5 minutes, all the participants, or 10 minutes, all the participants, and actually see those patterns immediately. It was just astonishing, because I feel like all of a sudden, instead of spending, you know, a couple of hours trying to code up everything and, like, you know, start splitting up everybody, I could just do it really quickly. Like, you know, within, like, go to one little section, code everything up. It's like, I can see the patterns, and it's like, wow, this is actually really fast. This is different. It's like, wow, look at that. Technology works. So it's great. Yeah, there's been some really interesting benefits.
I think just for myself, part of the design process is about, you know, lateral thinking and trying to come up with new solutions to existing problems, and having easy access to just stop and go for a 10-minute walk because you're already dressed in comfortable clothing. For me, it really helps, and really helps something that I might have spent an hour trying to just get through. I go outside, go for a walk, the old Einstein method of thinking of a math problem before you set out, and by the time you come back, you've sort of worked through how to come up with a solution to it.
Okay, so one last question for the evening. I think a few people wrote this one, and it's for all three. If you could let your imagination fly, has there been a moment where you thought, you know, there is just a tool, there's no tool for this, I need a tool for this? Is there a certain tool that you would create post-COVID?
There's so many tools out there. It might actually already exist. No, not yet. Apart from, you know, being able to process some thoughts faster or do the work for me. I probably do that.
I've been playing a bit with VR, and we got a new VR toy at our house. So I would love to be able to do VR and be able to go into people's homes, and it sounds kind of creepy, but you know, in terms of ethnographic research, to be able to follow along and see some of these areas that when you are often doing face-to-face research, sometimes it can feel like a little bit of community theater. You know, that the way that a workplace might handle a safety process or check to make sure that things are okay is different because you're there watching. So it would be interesting to see kind of more fly on the wall of what really goes on, to be able to better observe things that are going to work rather than how people want you to think things work. So can someone just design that? That'd be nice. Thanks.
A tool to remove bias. That'd be nice.
Oh yeah.
Lucy, did you have any dream tools that you would like to create?
I'm still thinking about it, and I feel like it's hard because there are so many great tools out there that I've become so reliant on, and to a point where you don't even realize how reliant you are until it crashes and you cry. But what I would say is, like, I was wondering, like, if there's a way of something that I've faced quite a lot with meetings is that occasionally there is this something's missed in translation, which is just natural with an online meeting and a virtual sort of video conferencing tool. But if there's a way that you could like capture the energy of the awkward silence and sort of champion that in a weird way, or be able to sort of donate that energy elsewhere, I think would be really cool. Because and it's something that initially when we were all working remotely, it just happens a lot, and now we all sort of laugh and we shrug it off, but it's still there. And I think if we were in the same room, we would have a lot less of those. It's just something that it comes up all the time. So whether there's some sort of interesting creative way you could use that space that happens, not too sure exactly how, but yeah, it's just something that I've become really familiar with now. It's the classic awkward silence. Like now.
If everyone's like silent, waiting for the next person to speak, or maybe internet, like something like throws weird, and everyone's like, "What?"
That bit, that precious bit.
I love that. Record it all and just have it kept forever. Well, thank you very much. I think that's all the questions. So, Berlin, if you want to wrap it up for us, thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Mon. Rightio. So we've come to the end of our first online meetup. Thank you to our three speakers, Miriana, Melissa, and Lucy, for joining us tonight with your awesome stories and insights and learnings. Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight as well and gave us your 1.5 hours this evening. We hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, the recording will be posted on the meetup event. We'll post a link to it after tonight. And until then, keep an eye out for our next event. Like we said, we are using the survey results to design the future events for ladies at UX Melbourne. So keep an eye on it. Until then, stay safe and keep well. Thank you.